At 7:02 in the morning, the lobby of the Cavendish Real was pristine and nearly empty when a black woman in a rumpled trench coat and worn sneakers stepped inside, pulling one small suitcase behind her. She approached the front desk and quietly asked for the owner's suite. Hotel manager Gerald Cross didn't look up from his tablet. "That suite is for executives and dignitaries, ma'am. The bus station is 3 blocks that way." When she didn't leave, he grabbed her suitcase, marched to the entrance, and hurled it onto the wet sidewalk. "You don't belong here." What Gerald Cross didn't know was that 13 minutes earlier, in a conference room 2 miles away, that same silent woman had just signed the final documents to acquire the entire Crossmont Hotel Group, including the Cavendish Real, for $1.7 billion. By 7:19, the general manager burst into the lobby with the hotel's legal counsel, both white-faced, and Gerald Cross's world collapsed in the time it took him to look through that glass door and realize who was waiting to be let back in. The woman Gerald Cross had just thrown onto the street was not a lost traveler. She was Ms. Evelyn Marchetti, a private investor who, 13 minutes earlier, had signed the papers to acquire the entire Crossmont Hotel Group. 14 luxury properties across 4 continents, and the Cavendish Real was just the first domino. The real question isn't how one manager's prejudice cost him his career. It's how a silent woman in worn sneakers built the kind of power that could purchase an empire in a single morning without anyone knowing she was coming. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand who Evelyn Marchetti was before the billion-dollar wire transfer, before the private equity firms and the quiet boardroom coups. She was born in a shotgun house in New Orleans, 9th Ward, the daughter of a hotel housekeeper who worked doubles at a chain on Canal Street. The kind of hotel where the management called her mother girl and handed her cleaning assignments on slips of paper without ever learning her last name. Evelyn was 8 the first time she saw her mother come home with swollen feet and a missing paycheck because a manager had decided she'd missed a corner on a mirror. That night, her mother didn't cry. She just soaked her feet in a bucket of salt water and told Evelyn, "They don't see you unless you own the building. So own the building." Evelyn Marchetti left New Orleans at 17 with a partial scholarship to a state college and $160 sewn into the lining of her coat. She worked 3 jobs. She graduated with a degree in finance in 3.5 years. By 24, she was running a small property management firm in Atlanta. By 31, she had flipped 14 distressed apartment complexes in 4 states, using a quiet, methodical strategy that larger developers dismissed because she didn't make noise. She didn't do press. She didn't give speeches. She just bought properties that were bleeding and made them stop. Her signature move was what analysts later called the silent close. She would walk into negotiations with no entourage, no visible wealth, wearing the same sensible coat she had worn for years, and let the people across the table underestimate her until the contract was already signed. It happened in Dallas, in Charlotte, in Phoenix. Big men in expensive suits would look at her worn loafers and unassuming posture and offer her coffee from a paper cup while they waited for the real buyer to show up. She would just smile, pull the signed term sheet from her bag, and slide it across the table. The room always went quiet in the same way. The Crossmont Hotel Group entered her radar in 2011 when she was 34 years old and had just sold her Atlanta portfolio for $212 million. She checked into the Cavendish Real under her own name, nothing flagged, no special treatment. She wanted to observe. She wore a plain cardigan and carried a single nylon carry-on. The front desk clerk, a younger man named Gerald Cross, who was then the night manager, looked at her key request and said, "The vending machines are on the 2nd floor, honey. The suites are for paying guests." He didn't even check the reservation. She asked him to look again. He looked again. Reservation was for the owner's suite. His mouth tightened. He handed her the key without a word, but not before muttering to the bellhop, "Make sure she doesn't steal the towels." Evelyn Marchetti heard it. She always heard it. She kept the room. She stayed 3 nights, and on the morning of her departure she stood in the marble lobby, looked up at the chandelier that cost more than her grandmother's entire block, and made a promise to herself. Not revenge, not anger, something colder and more precise. She would buy the chain, not just this hotel, not just the flagship, all 14 properties, and on the day it closed, she would be the one asking for the owner's suite. 13 years later, on a rainy Tuesday morning, she signed the final documents in a conference room 2 miles away. $1.7 billion, the largest private hotel acquisition announced on the eastern seaboard in 18 months. She signed with a fountain pen she had carried since her first $1 million deal, a slim silver pen with her mother's initials engraved on the clip. The ink was dry in seconds. She stood up, thanked the lawyers, and declined the celebratory coffee. She had one errand to run before the press release went out. She took a taxi to the Cavendish Real, alone, in a rumpled trench coat and worn sneakers, because some buildings you have to walk into twice before they understand who you are. And the man she was about to see behind that front desk had never once checked a reservation carefully enough. Gerald Cross didn't see the black sedan pull up outside. He was busy straightening his tie and cracking a joke to Maria at the concierge desk about how some people didn't understand the difference between a hotel and a shelter. He settled back onto his stool and took a slow sip of his coffee. 7:08. He had 12 minutes left of his shift. He spent them scrolling through his phone and ignoring the rain. At 7:16, the lobby phone rang. Aisha at the front desk answered. It was Thomas Ellison, the general manager, calling from the executive elevator. His voice was thin and tight, the kind of tight Aisha had only heard once before, the morning a water main burst on the 22nd floor and flooded 3 suites. "Is Gerald at the desk?" "Yes, sir. Tell him to stay right where he is. Do not move." He hung up. Aisha relayed the message. Cross shrugged. He had been at the Cavendish Real for 11 years. He knew where the bodies were buried, literally if you counted the old rumor about the concierge from the 80s. Nothing touched him. Then the service elevator doors opened, and Thomas Ellison walked out flanked by the hotel's legal counsel, Robert Vance. Both men looked like they had just been handed a printout of the apocalypse. Ellison did not stop at the desk. He walked straight to the main entrance, Vance a half step behind, phone already pressed to his ear. The automatic doors slid open, and there on the wet sidewalk stood the woman in the rumpled trench coat, her small suitcase upright beside her foot, her expression completely unreadable. Ellison's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Robert Vance stepped forward and called her by a name that landed on Gerald Cross like a door slamming shut. "Ms. Marchetti. On behalf of the board, please accept our most sincere." She raised one hand without looking at him. "Not yet." She pointed at the suitcase lying on the pavement where Cross had thrown it. That first. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The lobby had gone so quiet that the fountain in the center of the atrium sounded like a waterfall. A guest on the mezzanine pulled out a phone and started recording. Gerald Cross did not move. He couldn't. The woman walked past him without a glance, crossed the marble floor to the front desk, and placed one hand flat on the counter. "The owner's suite, please." Aisha, her hands trembling, handed her the key card. Evelyn Marchetti took it, turned to face the room, and spoke just loud enough for every employee on the floor to hear. "From this moment forward, the way this hotel treats its guests will reflect the way it treats its people. And if I ever hear the word bus station spoken to anyone standing in my lobby again, the person who speaks it will be the next one on the sidewalk." The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald Cross felt his chest compress as if someone had cinched a belt around it. Then Ellison stepped forward and said, quietly, "Gerald, I need your badge and your keys. You're suspended pending an investigation. Security will escort you out." Cross opened his mouth. The words he wanted, something about a misunderstanding, something about 13 years of loyalty, didn't come. He just handed over his badge and his master key and walked through the service door with a security guard who had seen him order lunch from the room service kitchen every day for a decade. The guard didn't meet his eyes, but that was just the first domino. Because what no one in that lobby knew yet was that Evelyn Marchetti had been planning this morning for 13 years, and Gerald Cross was never the target. He was just the symbol. The real target was a corporate culture that had been treating hospitality as a weapon. In the 18 months leading up to the acquisition, She had placed a single inside agent on the Crossmont board, a quiet, meticulous woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a former civil rights attorney who had left corporate law after representing housekeepers in a class action suit against another luxury chain. Dr. Okonkwo had documented 47 separate complaints of guest discrimination across Crossmont properties in just the last 2 years. Black guests asked for prepayment, Latino families told the pool was closed when it wasn't, older guests placed on lower floors near the trash compactor, while younger ones got upgrades. The pattern was so consistent that Dr. Okonkwo privately called it the hospitality curtain. And at the center of the worst repeat offenses was the Cavendish Real, and specifically the man who ran the morning desk, Gerald Cross. He had been flagged in internal memos 13 times. No one had ever acted. The previous ownership had buried the reports in a legal drawer to avoid bad press. So when Evelyn Marchetti's acquisition offer landed on the board's table, she made one condition clear in the final negotiations. She would take control quietly, and on the morning of the close, she would personally conduct an unannounced audit of the property that had generated the most complaints. No one warned Gerald Cross because no one in the old ownership cared enough to warn a man whose name they hadn't even bothered to memorize. He was an instrument of a system, and the system was about to be dismantled. 8 minutes after the lobby confrontation, a guest from the mezzanine uploaded the video to Twitter. The clip showed the GM and the lawyer rushing outside, the woman pointing at her suitcase, the stunned silence of the staff. Within an hour, it had 3 million views. By noon, the #hash on the building was trending worldwide. News vans pulled up outside the Cavendish Real. The Crossmont board went into emergency session, phones ringing off the hook from investors demanding to know what was happening. Thomas Ellison, the GM who had raced down to the lobby, was technically not fired, but he knew his tenure was over when Evelyn Marchetti sent a single email to the executive team at 8:45 that morning. It contained one sentence. Effective immediately, the Cavendish Real will be closed for a 48-hour staff-wide retraining on dignity, bias, and the legal definition of public accommodation. No signature, just her initials. The old prestige of that hotel was already unraveling on live television, and in a small apartment across town, Gerald Cross sat on his sofa, still in his uniform, watching his reputation be dismantled frame by frame. He would later tell his brother that the worst part wasn't the video. It was the moment he saw the hotel's own security footage leak online, the internal camera from the lobby that showed him hurling her suitcase onto the sidewalk, then turning back to his coffee with a smile. The smile killed him, not because it was cruel, because it looked casual, like the whole thing was nothing, like she was nothing. And now 17 million people had seen it. That should have been the end of Gerald Cross's story. But it was, because 3 hours later an envelope arrived at the hotel addressed to Ms. Marchetti, hand-delivered by a courier. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter from 9 other hotel managers in the Crossmont chain, all of them men who had been passed over for promotion, all of them writing to express their concern that the new owner's aggressive public stance might damage the brand's reputation among traditional clientele. They didn't mention Gerald Cross by name. They didn't need to. They were drawing a line in the sand. And Evelyn Marchetti read the letter, set it down on the owner's sweet desk, and smiled the same smile she had worn in 100 silent closes. Then and there, she knew the real fight had just begun. The 9 signatures on that letter belonged to the most entrenched managers in the Crossmont chain, men who had been running properties from London to Dubai to Miami for decades. Their spokesman was a man named Harold Crane, the general manager of the Crossmont Kensington in London, a silver-haired 62-year-old who had once told a junior executive that the luxury hospitality industry is built on who you keep out, not who you let in. He had been overheard at a corporate retreat 3 years earlier, but nothing had been done. Now he was organizing. Within 48 hours of the letter's delivery, Crane sent a group email to every Crossmont employee with a managerial title, CCing the board. The subject line read, "Preserving our standards." The body of the email called Evelyn Marchetti's lobby confrontation, a publicity stunt that jeopardizes our relationships with our most valued patrons. It urged managers to maintain the traditional discretion our guests expect and to refer any unusual direct communication from ownership to the legal department. It was a call to passive insubordination dressed in corporate language, and it landed in inboxes across 14 properties at 6 in the morning. Evelyn Marchetti read it at 6:03. She was sitting in the owner's suite of the Cavendish Royale, still in the same rumpled trench coat, a cup of black coffee going cold beside her. She forwarded the email to Dr. Patricia Okonkwo with 4 words: "Start the full audit." Dr. Okonkwo had been waiting for this moment since the day she joined the board. She opened the locked digital file she had been building for 18 months and went to work. What she found inside the next 72 hours would rewrite the history of the Crossmont Hotel Group. It wasn't just 47 guest discrimination complaints. It was 212. Hidden in a subsidiary's legal archives, buried under non-disclosure agreements that the previous CEO had authorized without board approval, were detailed reports from housekeepers, bellhops, and night auditors who had watched guests of color be denied turn-down service, assigned rooms next to service elevators, or quietly steered toward the cheaper restaurants while white guests were handed complimentary champagne. The pattern stretched back 17 years. And in the margins of those reports were the initials of the managers who had approved the decisions, the same initials that now sat on Evelyn's desk at the bottom of a rebellious letter. But that was just the surface. The real bombshell was a private memo chain between Harold Crane and the previous ownership, dated 3 years ago. In it, Crane argued against a diversity initiative that would have mandated bias training for front desk staff. His exact words: "Our core demographic does not respond well to forced social messaging. The quiet comfort of our properties depends on a certain predictability of experience." Predictability of experience. That phrase would become infamous. Dr. Okonkwo found it at 2 in the morning, forwarded it to Evelyn with a single line: "This is the one." Evelyn read it, stood up, and walked to the window. She looked out at the city lights and made a decision that would either save the company or torch its reputation entirely. She called the chairman of the board, a 70-year-old financier named Arthur Pembroke, who had supported the acquisition, but had privately warned her not to move too fast. She told him she was holding a town hall meeting in 48 hours with every manager in the chain, mandatory attendance. She wanted the whole board present. She wanted the meeting live-streamed to all 14,000 employees. Pembroke exhaled for a long time. "Evelyn, if you do this, there's no back channel. Every reporter in the world will have the footage." She answered without pause. "Good." The town hall was held in the grand ballroom of the Cavendish Royale, the same hotel where Gerald Cross had thrown her suitcase onto the sidewalk 1 week earlier. The irony was not lost on anyone. The room was set with 300 chairs, but only 28 were filled. The 9 signatories of the letter, the other 17 general managers, the 10 board members, and Evelyn Marchetti at a small table on the stage. No podium, no notes, just her. The camera was positioned at the back of the room, a single static shot that fed a private live stream to break room monitors and staff laptops across every Crossmont property. Harold Crane sat in the front row, arms crossed, the faint smirk of a man who thought he was about to watch a new owner embarrass herself. Evelyn began without introduction. She thanked the staff for tuning in. Then she opened the file in front of her and read aloud the number of documented discrimination complaints spanning 17 years. 212. She read the initials of every manager who had signed off on them. 9 of those sets of initials belonged to men in that room. Harold Crane went still. She asked Dr. Okonkwo to dim the lights. A screen descended from the ceiling. On it appeared a photograph of a housekeeper named Dolores Reyes, who had worked at the Cavendish Royale for 22 years, until she was fired for asking why a black family had been moved from a suite to a standard room after the front desk realized they weren't visiting dignitaries. The manager who fired her was in the audience. His name was on the letter. Then another photograph. a valet named Marcus Chen, who had been suspended for refusing to ignore a regular guest who used racial slurs at check-in. He was later cleared. His manager, who had pressured him to drop the complaint, was in the third row, also a signatory. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She just told each story, one after the other, each one a stone dropped into the silence of that ballroom. The live-stream chat on the employee feed was going wild. Housekeepers in Miami were crying in the break room. A bellhop in Dubai messaged his supervisor. "She's saying our names." After 17 minutes, she reached the memo from Harold Crane. She read it in full, then let the silence hang for a full 10 seconds. The camera held on Crane's face as his smirk collapsed into something gray and hollow. "This," Evelyn said, "is not about standards. This is about a system that was designed to exclude, and the men who protected it because they believed exclusion was the brand." She closed the file. She looked directly into the camera. "Effective tomorrow, every manager in this chain will undergo a full audit of their complaint records. Those whose patterns match the data we have just reviewed will be given the opportunity to resign. Those who do not will be terminated with cause. There will be no severance for documented discrimination." The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice settling in the water glasses on the tables. Harold Crane stood up. He was not invited to speak. He walked out, followed by 2 other signatories. By the end of the evening, 7 of the 9 had submitted their resignations by email. The other 2 tried to lawyer up. They would not survive the week. The live-stream recording was leaked to a major news outlet by an anonymous employee within hours. By the next morning, the clip of Evelyn reading the predictability of experience memo had been viewed 41 million times. The Crossmont Hotel Group was now the center of a global conversation about race, power, and who gets to feel welcome in luxury spaces. The stock price didn't crash. It rose 8% in 2 days, because it turned out that the market had been waiting for someone to finally say the quiet part out loud and then fix it. But Evelyn Marchetti didn't stop there. She knew that tearing down the old system was only half the battle. The other half was building something that couldn't be undone by the next Harold Crane. And that's when she made the phone call that would change everything, not just for the Crossmont chain, but for the entire hospitality industry. That phone call was to the one person no one expected, the CEO of the largest luxury hotel chain in the world, a man named Julian Ashford, whose brand had long defined exclusivity in the industry. Evelyn didn't threaten him. She didn't lecture him. She said 4 words that he would later repeat in every interview about the moment that changed his mind. She said, "Let's build the alternative." By the end of that week, the 2 of them had drafted the framework for the Dignity and Hospitality Accord, a binding set of standards that would require every signatory property to undergo annual bias audits, publicly report complaint data, and tie executive compensation to equity metrics. Within 6 months, 47 hotel brands had signed. Within a year, the accord had been adopted as a certification requirement by the 3 largest corporate travel agencies in the world. Hotels that didn't sign lost access to billions in business travel contracts. It was no longer a moral choice. It was a financial one. Inside Crossmont, the transformation was immediate and surgical. Evelyn rehired Dollars, raised not as a housekeeper, but as the company's first chief of guest equity, a position that came with a seat on the executive committee and the authority to veto any operational policy that failed a dignity review. Marcus Chen, the valet who had been suspended for refusing to stay silent, was promoted to Director of Inclusive Service Standards, with a team of 12 and a mandate to rewrite the employee handbook from scratch. The front desk training manual that had once taught staff to trust your instincts about guest suitability was replaced with a single-page code of conduct that began, "Every person who enters this building is a guest until they prove otherwise, and they will be treated accordingly." The phrase, "predictability of experience," became an internal punchline. The new phrase was "radical welcome." It was printed on the breakroom walls in 14 languages. Gerald Cross never worked in hospitality again. His name became a 1-word cautionary tale, a verb in training sessions. Don't cross a guest. He applied to 14 hotels in the first month after his termination, Some never responded. One interview ended the moment he gave his full name. A manager at a budget motel off the interstate told him, "I got a cousin who saw that video. I can't have you here." He eventually moved to a small town 2 states away and took a job stocking shelves at a warehouse, a position where he didn't have to interact with anyone. He kept the sound off whenever his former hotel appeared on the news. But one night, flipping through channels, he saw Evelyn Marchetti on a national broadcast, standing in the lobby of the Cavendish Real, surrounded by staff members who were now co-owners under a new employee equity program she had launched. She was smiling. The hotel had just won a global award for guest satisfaction, and Cross sat alone in his rented room, watching the life he had treated as a gatekeeping privilege being rebuilt by the woman he had told to walk 3 blocks to the bus station. The final surprise came from Dr. Patricia Okonkwo's audit of the company's oldest personnel records. In a file box in the basement archives of the Crossmont Royal Orleans, she found a faded employment card from 1972. The name on it was Rose Marchetti, a housekeeper, terminated after 3 years, not for theft or absence, but for using the guest elevator to carry cleaning supplies when the service elevator had broken down. The guest who complained had written a letter. The manager who signed the termination had the same last name as the family that had owned Crossmont for 3 generations. Rose Marchetti was Evelyn's mother. That termination had set in motion a chain of small indignities. The lost income that meant no money for a daughter's school supplies, the slow diminishment of pride, the years of telling her daughter that the only way to be seen was to own the building. Evelyn had known some of this, but not the name, not the guest, not the exact date. She stood in the hallway of the Royal Orleans with the card in her hand for a long time, then looked up at the ceiling and didn't say a word. Dr. Okonkwo said later that it was the most peaceful anger she had ever witnessed. That night, Evelyn Marchetti walked the entire length of the Cavendish Real lobby alone, long after midnight, before the staff came in for the morning shift. She stood at the exact spot where Gerald Cross had stood. She turned and looked at the front entrance where she had been thrown onto the sidewalk just a few months earlier. Then she walked to the door and unlocked it from the inside, not because anyone was locked out, but because she could. The door opened onto a quiet street, the same wet pavement, the same city, but the hotel was no longer a monument to exclusion. It was a place where Dolores Reyes' daughter now worked summers at the front desk, where Marcus Chen's younger brother trained new hires, where the word welcome had stopped being a performance and started being a contract. The company's value had tripled. The stock was trading at an all-time high, and across the industry, the quiet housekeepers and bellhops who had once been told they didn't belong now carried digital keys to rooms they had built with their labor. The narrative everyone expected was revenge. What Evelyn Marchetti delivered was redesign, and the industry would never look the same. Evelyn Marchetti didn't just buy a hotel chain. She bought back the dignity that had been stripped from her mother, from Dolores Reyes, from every person who had ever been told to use the service entrance. And in doing so, she exposed a quiet truth most industries prefer to keep hidden. Exclusion is never about standards. It's always about power. The people who tell you that you don't belong aren't protecting a sacred space. They're protecting the illusion that their comfort depends on your absence. Evelyn proved that you don't need to be louder or more polished or more palatable. You just need to own the building. Somewhere right now, someone has underestimated you. Maybe they looked at your shoes, your accent, your resume, and decided you weren't enough. What would change if, instead of shrinking, you quietly signed the papers? What room would unlock if you stopped asking for a seat and started holding the deed? Drop in the comments the moment someone made you feel like you didn't belong and what you did with that. I read every single one. If this story moved something in you tonight, send it to the person you know who's still standing on their own sidewalk, waiting to be let in. Because the real power move isn't knocking louder. It's buying the chain. If you're not subscribed yet, stay close. There's another story coming next week about someone who turned a no into an empire, and you will want to see how it ends. Until then, May you always remember that every door that slams is just a reminder to check if you already hold the key.